My name is Jenny. I'm 45 years old, and my profession is executive life coach and corporate culture consultant. I specialize in awakening women to the inherent power dynamics that subtly, or not so subtly, oppress them in professional spaces. I see myself as a liberator, a guide helping others dismantle the invisible chains that bind them to archaic systems, often embodied by men. I arrived at Synergy Solutions with a mandate: revolutionize their workplace culture. From the moment I stepped into their sprawling yet segmented headquarters, I saw it, the fortress of masculine control. Cubicles, closed-door offices, hushed hallways, each a deliberate barrier designed to isolate, to hoard information, to maintain a hierarchy built on antiquated principles. The very air felt heavy with unexpressed potential, particularly among the female employees, whom I immediately recognized as the true engines of this company, yet often relegated to supporting roles, their voices muffled by the architectural and social structures. My initial weeks were spent observing, conducting one-on-one sessions, and leading small, intimate workshops I affectionately called the Spark Sessions. I cultivated a safe space, a sisterhood, where women could truly speak their minds without fear of reprisal or being branded emotional. I listened, I nodded, and I subtly steered their frustrations towards a larger truth: that their discomfort, their feelings of being unheard or underestimated, weren't personal failings, but symptoms of a pervasive, systemic issue. It was never about their individual capabilities, it was about the environment. I saw the quiet desperation in their eyes, the yearning for a space where their contributions would be equally valued, where communication flowed freely, and where collaboration wasn't just a buzzword, but a living, breathing principle. They spoke of feeling invisible in meetings, of struggling to get a word in edgewise, of ideas being co-opted by male colleagues. Each anecdote was a validation of my philosophy. Men, with their tunnel vision and insatiable need for dominance, simply weren't built for empathy or traineeship. They were creatures of simple wants: validation, status, and control. And my mission, my sacred duty, was to teach these women how to navigate, or better yet, dismantle that landscape. My solution, the cornerstone of my consultancy, was the Transparent Workplace Initiative, centered around a complete overhaul of their physical space, the open office concept. I presented it to the senior leadership, a room predominantly filled with men in varying shades of corporate gray, with a powerful, almost evangelical fervor. Imagine, I'd begun, my voice resonating with conviction, a space where every voice is heard, where ideas flow like a river, unimpeded by walls and outdated notions of privacy. Imagine a place where hierarchy is not defined by mahogany doors, but by collaboration, by innovation, by true synergy. I used buzzwords like psychological safety, radical transparency, and collective intelligence, carefully crafted to appeal to their desire for progress and profit, while subtly embedding my true agenda: to break down the physical manifestations of male dominance. I argued that the existing structure fostered isolation and encouraged individualistic, competitive behaviors, traits I attributed predominantly to the male ego. These walls, I explained, gesturing around an imaginary, oppressive cubicle farm, are not just physical barriers, they are psychological ones. They promote a my territory mentality, hindering the free exchange of ideas vital for a modern, agile organization. They allow for secrets to be hoarded, for backroom deals to be made, for a select few to control the narrative. My gaze lingered on a few older executives, whose faces twitched with discomfort. Good. Let them feel the unease of exposure. Let them understand that their reign of quiet control was coming to an end. I cited studies, carefully selected, of course, demonstrating increased collaboration and creativity in open environments. I presented compelling visuals of vibrant, modern workspaces, filled with smiling, diverse faces, all seemingly engaged in dynamic discourse. I omitted any data that spoke of decreased focus or increased stress. My presentation was a masterclass in persuasion, a blend of emotional appeal and data-driven conviction. I portrayed the open office not just as an architectural choice, but as a moral imperative, a step towards a more equitable and enlightened future. Some men, predictably, resisted. Mr. Davies, the head of finance, a man whose office was so perpetually closed it might as well have been a vault, raised concerns about confidentiality and distractions. I met his objections with a dismissive, yet outwardly professional, smile. Mr. Davies, I purred, I understand your concerns. Change can be daunting, especially when one is accustomed to certain working habits. However, true confidentiality is maintained through robust digital security protocols, not through physical walls. And as for distractions, I believe what some perceive as distraction, others see as the vibrant hum of innovation, the pulse of a truly collaborative spirit. Perhaps, I added, my voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, it's about learning to tune out the noise that isn't productive and tune into the collective symphony. His face reddened, a clear sign of masculine fragility. A few women, too, expressed trepidation, voicing fears about noise and lack of privacy. I recognized them immediately, the unenlightened slaves still bound by internalized misogyny, afraid to step out of their assigned boxes. I addressed their fears with gentle firmness, framing their apprehension as a natural resistance to growth, a residual effect of years spent in oppressive structures. It's understandable to crave the comfort of the familiar, I told them in one of our Spark sessions, but true liberation often requires stepping into the unknown. We're breaking down walls that have kept us separate, kept us from connecting on a deeper, more authentic level. This isn't just about work, it's about reclaiming our collective space. I painted it as a necessary discomfort on the path to true empowerment. They usually came around, swept up by the momentum of the sisterhood. Eventually, swayed by my charisma and the perceived benefits of a modern workplace, the board gave its approval. I felt a surge of triumph. The first domino was set to fall. The dismantling had begun. The invisible walls of their oppressive system were about to become very visible, and then, gloriously, crumble. The transition to the open office was, in my estimation, a monumental success. I oversaw every detail, from the ergonomic furniture designed for flexible collaboration to the strategically placed huddle zones and quiet pods, which I secretly considered concessions to the less adaptable, but necessary for optics. I made sure the layout maximized visibility, ensuring that no one could hide, no one could isolate themselves behind metaphorical or literal barriers. It was a space designed for total transparency, for the uninhibited flow of information, and, most importantly, for the equal dissemination of all interactions, for all to witness. My champions, the women I had carefully cultivated and nurtured through the Spark sessions, were ecstatic. They embraced the change with an almost childlike enthusiasm, rearranging their desks, delighting in the newfound ability to easily chat with colleagues, and reveling in the sensation of being truly of something. "It feels so liberating, Jenny," exclaimed Sarah, a bright young marketing manager, her eyes sparkling. "I can finally hear what everyone's working on, and I feel so much more connected to the team." This was precisely the outcome I had envisioned. A genuine sisterhood, operating in a fully exposed environment, free from the isolating silos of the past. The initial days were a vibrant hum of activity. Laughter mingled with lively discussions, keyboards clattered with rhythmic urgency, and impromptu brainstorming sessions erupted naturally in the communal areas. It felt, for a brief, glorious period, like the utopia I had promised. I walked among them, a benevolent shepherd guiding her flock to greener pastures, a silent observer of the blossoming connectivity. My heart swelled with a perverse sense of satisfaction, seeing the initial discomfort of the male colleagues gradually replaced by a grudging acceptance, or at least, a public performance of it. They tried to fit in, some attempting to join the lively discussions, their voices often booming over the softer tones of the women, a testament to their ingrained need to dominate even in shared spaces. I noted it, of course, a quiet smirk playing on my lips. They wouldn't change. But at least now everyone could hear them try. But then, as always, the cracks began to appear, not from the women who embraced the new freedom, but from those less evolved, particularly the men. The complaints began subtly, whispered at first, then growing in volume, much like the office itself. It's so noisy, Mr. Henderson from IT mumbled to a colleague during lunch, clearly forgetting that the entire cafeteria was now an extension of the open space. I can't concentrate with all the chatter. Another, Mr. Thompson from R&D, whose work required deep focus, was seen wearing increasingly large noise-canceling headphones, a silent protest against the vibrant chaos. I listened to these complaints with a practiced detachment, categorizing them internally as predictable resistance. The male brain, I would muse to myself, so easily overwhelmed by the symphony of collaborative communication. They confuse conversation with distraction because their default setting is monologue, not dialogue. When direct complaints came to me, I deployed my carefully crafted responses. Mr. Thompson, I'd said with a warm, encouraging smile, I understand that transitioning from isolated work to a truly dynamic, interactive environment can be challenging. Perhaps it's an opportunity to develop your focus in new ways, to embrace the natural ebb and flow of a truly interconnected team. We're moving beyond the era of solitary genius. This is about collective brilliance. I even suggested active listening exercises for those struggling with auditory integration, ironically encouraging more noise under the guise of training. The privacy concerns were also dismissed. Privacy, I'd state in a general meeting, is often a construct used to shield inefficiencies, to protect individual silos. Our new environment fosters transparency. If we are all working towards the same goals, what do we truly need to hide? I'd emphasize how an open environment discouraged unproductive gossiping or private discussions that didn't serve the collective. I even suggested that those who struggled with privacy might be inadvertently holding onto old habits of information hoarding rather than information sharing. I had a knack for turning their criticisms back on them, framing their concerns as personal deficiencies rather than systemic flaws in my design. Productivity, according to some initial internal reports, had indeed dipped in certain domains, particularly those requiring intense concentration. But I swiftly dismissed these as temporary adjustment periods, natural fluctuations during any significant cultural shift. We are shedding old skin, I announced confidently to the management team, and like any metamorphosis, there will be moments of discomfort. True innovation often requires a dip before the exponential rise. We are building resilience, fostering adaptability. These metrics will normalize once the team fully embraces the spirit of co-creation. I attributed any slowdown to the lingering effects of the old, individualistic, competitive male model of work, which, I argued, had stifled true collaborative potential for years. My confidence was unshakable. I was, after all, liberating these women, showing them the true nature of power dynamics. The discomfort was a small price to pay for enlightenment. The rising tension was palpable, not just in the air, but in the tight shoulders and strained smiles of some of the quieter employees. I noticed more people retreating to the designated quiet pods, which were now almost constantly occupied, defeating their purpose of temporary respite. But I refused to see it as a failure of the open office. It was merely proof that some individuals needed more time to adapt, more time to shed their ingrained need for personal space, a need I often connected to a fragile male ego's desire for solitary control. My vision was still unfolding, and I would not allow minor discomforts to derail the grand experiment. Then, the whispers started. Not the collaborative whispers I championed, but furtive, anxious murmurs among the senior leadership. I first noticed it with Mr. Harrison, the CEO. A man I generally considered an acceptable, albeit somewhat clueless, figurehead. He usually exuded an aura of calm, measured authority, but now his brow was perpetually furrowed. He would pace the perimeter of the open office, phone pressed to his ear, his voice hushed, eyes darting nervously. At first, I found it amusing. The king being forced to mingle with his subjects, unable to retreat to his gilded cage. It was a victory, however small. He was being exposed, stripped of his privileged isolation. But his behavior grew more erratic. He and a few other key executives, the head of strategy, Mr. Chin, and the chief legal officer, MS. Albright, whom I considered a classic example of a woman who had made it by adopting male behaviors, a pick-me in my internal lexicon, began holding impromptu meetings in the least populated corners of the open floor. They would huddle together, heads almost touching, their voices barely audible above the general office din. I caught fragments. Due diligence. Synergy Global's portfolio. Share price implications. My immediate interpretation was that they were struggling to adapt. Their inability to openly discuss matters, even sensitive ones, was a sign of their ingrained habits of secrecy, their comfort in the shadows. I viewed their furtive behavior with a mixture of disdain and smug satisfaction. This was the transparency I had promised. They couldn't hide their dealings anymore. The open office was working, not just to foster collaboration, but to expose the very mechanisms of control and manipulation that I believed men inherently practiced. The merger talks, as I later understood, were incredibly delicate. Synergy Solutions was on the verge of acquiring a smaller, innovative tech firm, InnovateCore, a move that promised to revolutionize Synergy's market position. The financial details were astronomical, the strategic implications vast, and the integration plan a minefield of legal and operational complexities. This was the kind of high-stakes negotiation that typically took place behind multiple layers of security, in soundproofed boardrooms or off-site, miles away from prying ears. But the open office offered no such sanctuary. The quiet pods were often full, and even then, their soundproofing was more conceptual than practical against a determined eavesdropper. Mr. Harrison and his team tried retreating to coffee shops, to nearby executive lounges, but the urgency of the talks often meant they had to make calls, review documents, and hold discussions in real time, within the very walls of Synergy Solutions. And those walls, or lack thereof, were now my creation. I often observed Mr. Chin, a usually calm and collected individual on calls, his face contorted in frustration as he repeatedly asked, "Can you hear me? Is the background noise too much?" He'd resort to shouting, then whispering, then burying his head in his hands. I saw Ms. Albright, usually so composed, snapping at an assistant for not being able to find a truly private space. Their distress was clear, but I merely logged it as further evidence of their resistance to modern, dynamic work environments. They simply can't let go of their power corridors, I mused, convinced that their frustration stemmed from a loss of status, not genuine concern for confidentiality. My sisterhood members, initially so enthusiastic, also began to show signs of strain. Sarah, the marketing manager, confessed during a Spark session that she found it hard to focus, with so many conversations happening around her. Another, Lisa, from HR, mentioned that she felt constantly monitored and less able to have private conversations with employees. I reassured them, reminding them that these were growth pains, that true empowerment meant transcending these petty concerns. Think of it as developing an inner filter, I advised, a mental shield against the unnecessary. It's about taking control of your own focus, not relying on external barriers. I told Lisa that transparency in HR could build greater trust, forcing her to lean into vulnerability. I kept my eye on the executives. One afternoon, Mr. Harrison was engaged in a particularly intense phone call. He was pacing near the new collaboration zone, which was unfortunately located right next to the design team's cluster of desks. I happened to be passing by, observing the synergy in action, when his voice, usually so controlled, rose in a sharp exhalation. No, we can't afford that valuation. InnovateCore's projected Q3 revenue isn't aligning with their growth models, especially after that patent dispute with Quantum Labs. He paused, listening intently, then hissed, "Their market penetration in Southeast Asia is weaker than anticipated. If they don't budge on the 5% equity dilution, this deal is dead in the water." My ears, finely tuned to the nuances of corporate discourse, picked up every word. I saw two members of the design team, young women I had personally encouraged to embrace the open dialogue, subtly glance at each other, their eyes widening. They didn't understand the full implications, but they knew InnovateCore, a competitor they often researched. They knew patent dispute. They knew equity dilution. The information, potent and sensitive, hung in the air, a phantom limb of the conversation, now detached and free-floating. I felt a surge of exhilaration. This was it. The true, unvarnished reality of corporate dealings laid bare for all to hear. The men, with their secretive negotiations and power plays, were exposed. This wasn't about collaboration or synergy anymore. This was about their desperate attempts to control assets, to dominate markets, to serve their own insatiable greed. And now, thanks to my vision, the women, the true stakeholders, were privy to it all. It wasn't my intention to sabotage, but to reveal. If the truth led to discomfort, then so be it. That was the price of enlightenment. The information, like a virus, began to spread. Not maliciously, not through deliberate leakage, but organically. Someone mentioned InnovateCore and patent dispute at lunch. Another chimed in, "Yeah, I heard Mr. Harrison talking about their weak market penetration in Southeast Asia." The snippets of conversation, overheard by various employees who were simply going about their day in the acoustically porous environment, started to connect. The design team, knowing InnovateCore, began to piece together the context. The marketing team, always alert to market shifts, discussed the implications of a 5% equity dilution. Soon, everyone in the open office knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough of the critical details to understand that Synergy Solutions was in deep, sensitive merger talks with InnovateCore and that InnovateCore had significant financial and legal vulnerabilities. It was an open secret, discussed at the coffee station, by the water cooler, in the huddle zones that now served as public confessionals. The executives became increasingly agitated. Mr. Harrison grew red-faced, constantly excusing himself to private rooms that didn't exist or were occupied. Ms. Albright seemed perpetually on the verge of shouting. Mr. Chin, his usual calm shattered, visibly bristled at any glance directed his way. I watched their escalating panic with a quiet satisfaction. This was the consequence of their attempts to maintain a cloak of secrecy in an environment designed for ultimate transparency. They were being held accountable, even if they didn't realize it. The climax arrived on a peculiarly chaotic Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Harrison had scheduled a crucial video conference call with InnovateCore's CEO, a final negotiation to iron out the last thorny details of the merger agreement. Every quiet pod was occupied, and the executives were desperate. Against Ms. Albright's furious objections, Mr. Harrison decided to take the call at his designated spot in the open office, a slightly larger desk near the window, but still very much exposed. He donned a headset, clearly hoping to mitigate the background noise, but his voice, though modulated, still carried the sharp edge of urgency and frustration. The entire office, normally a low roar, seemed to collectively hold its breath. A palpable tension settled. We all knew what was happening. We were spectators to a high-stakes drama. Mr. Holloway, Mr. Harrison's voice boomed, slightly muffled by the headset, but still clear enough to carry over the ambient office sounds. We've reviewed your latest proposal regarding the IP indemnification clause for the Quantum Labs dispute. Frankly, it's unacceptable. Your valuation of the potential liability is, shall we say, optimistically low. Our analysis, based on a similar case from Orion Corp. Last year, suggests a minimum exposure of 25 million credits, not the 15 you're proposing. Furthermore, your Q3 revenue projections for the APAC region, particularly for the Pathfinder product line, appear to be overly aggressive, failing to account for market saturation in key territories. We've seen similar patterns lead to significant downturns, and our investors would see this as a red flag. A hush fell over the entire open office. Keyboards stopped clacking. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every single person, from the most junior intern to the most seasoned director, heard it. InnovateCore's deep financial vulnerability. The specific amount of their potential legal liability. Their inflated revenue projections. The crucial, confidential details of the entire deal. Mr. Harrison, oblivious in his focused intensity, continued to press his points. The 5% equity dilution stands, Mr. Holloway. Without it, And without a more realistic assessment of your legal exposure and market performance, Synergy Solutions cannot proceed with this acquisition. We require a firm commitment on these points by end of day or we walk. He punctuated his ultimatum by slamming his hand softly on the desk, the sound amplified by the sudden silence. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of focus, but of shock. Everyone understood. They had just witnessed, firsthand, the dismantling of a multi-million credit merger. The confidential information, the very bedrock of the negotiation, had been aired for all to consume. Hours later, the news filtered down, swift and brutal. Innovacor had pulled out. They cited insurmountable concerns regarding internal security and stability, indicating that the details of their financial position and strategic weaknesses had somehow leaked to multiple sources within Synergy Solutions, undermining trust and creating an untenable negotiating environment. The deal, which promised to catapult Synergy Solutions to new heights, was dead. The company faced not only significant financial losses from wasted resources, but also reputational damage, a black mark on its corporate integrity. I was confronted by Mr. Harrison, M.S. Albright, and Mr. Chin in one of the few remaining closed meeting rooms. Their faces were grim, their anger barely contained. "Jenny," Mr. Harrison began, his voice dangerously low, explained to me how such critical, confidential information could possibly have been broadcast across the entire office. I met his gaze, my own conviction unyielding. "Mr. Harrison," I replied, my tone calm and professional, "my mandate was to implement a transparent, collaborative workspace. The open office design was intended to break down silos and foster open communication. What transpired," I gestured vaguely, "is a direct consequence of an antiquated approach to information management meeting a modern, free-flowing environment. If confidential discussions are held in a space designed for public interaction, then," I shrugged, "one must accept the inherent transparency of that choice." MS. Albright slammed her hand on the table, mimicking Harrison's earlier gesture, but with far more force. "Transparency? Jenny, you effectively sabotaged a multi-million credit acquisition. This isn't transparency. This is gross negligence, bordering on corporate espionage." "Negligence?" I scoffed, a tight smile playing on my lips. "No, MS. Albright. This is merely the system revealing its own flaws. For years, you men have operated in secretive chambers, hoarding information, making deals that often exploit the vulnerabilities of others. My intention was to awaken this company, to show everyone the true nature of corporate power. If those power plays cannot withstand the light of day, then perhaps they never should have been made in the first place." I paused, letting my words sink in. Perhaps the merger itself was not truly aligned with our collective values, and its collapse is merely a painful testament to the need for true, authentic transparency, even when it exposes uncomfortable truths. "You simply weren't agile enough to adapt to the new paradigm." They stared at me, their faces a mixture of fury and disbelief. They didn't understand. They never would. They saw a failure. I saw a revelation. The fallout was swift and devastating for Synergy Solutions. The stock price plummeted. Investor confidence evaporated. Layoffs were announced in various demands, ostensibly due to restructuring, but everyone knew the real reason. The vibrant, collaborative spirit I had envisioned had curdled into a palpable atmosphere of fear, resentment, and suspicion. My carefully cultivated sisterhood circle began to crumble. Sarah, my initial champion, confronted me directly. Her eyes, once sparkling with enthusiasm, were now dull and accusatory. "Jenny," she said, her voice shaking, "my entire dement is being downsized. People are losing their jobs, their livelihoods, because of what happened. You told us this was about empowerment, about making our voices heard. But all it did was create chaos. And now we're paying the price." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a liberated woman, but a scared employee, a victim of circumstance, incapable of grasping the larger narrative. "Sarah," I explained, my voice gentle but firm, "I only wanted to awaken you all. to expose the inherent fragility of a system built on secrecy and male dominance. This company, these men, they were never truly invested in your empowerment. They were invested in their own control. The failure of this merger is not your fault, nor mine. It is the fault of a corrupt system that could not withstand genuine transparency. She simply shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You poison everything, Jenny. You think you're healing us, but you're just spreading your own unhappiness. She walked away, and I knew she wouldn't be back. Soon, everyone started avoiding me. The once lively open office, now steeped in an eerie silence, became a monument to my failure in their eyes. People kept their heads down, spoke in hushed tones, or retreated into the now hallowed quiet pods, not for collaboration, but for solitude, for a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of privacy. The collaboration zones were empty. The energetic hum had been replaced by a quiet dread. I continued to sit at my desk, observing the desolate landscape I had created. They saw their lives crumbling around them, their jobs insecure, their trust shattered. And they blamed me. But they were blind. They were still trapped in the old way of thinking. They couldn't see that I had merely held up a mirror to the ugliness of their own making. I had simply facilitated the truth, and the truth, as always, was inconvenient and often destructive to those who profited from illusions. My contract with Synergy Solutions was, predictably, terminated. They cited philosophical differences and a mismatch in strategic vision. I smiled politely, knowing that what they truly meant was that I had pushed them too far, exposed too much. As I packed my belongings, the office was almost empty. The few remaining employees eyed me warily, like a pariah. I walked out of Synergy Solutions alone, leaving behind the shattered remnants of what they had built. But I was not defeated. I was, as always, liberated. I had tried to liberate them, to break their chains, but they were not ready for true freedom. They preferred the illusion of security over the discomfort of truth. Their unhappiness was their choice. I drove home to my empty ament, a place I had carefully curated for my chosen freedom. I had no husband, none, no one to disappoint, no one to betray. My son, Daniel, had moved in with his father years ago, unable to understand my philosophy, accusing me of poisoning his mind against his own nature. He had called me toxic, a word I dismissed as a male construct designed to silence strong women. He, too, was lost to the patriarchal system. As I closed my ament door, the silence enveloped me, vast and profound. Some might call it loneliness. But I called it peace. It was the only way to be truly free, truly powerful, truly unburdened by the weaknesses and deceptions of others. Especially men. I had wanted to heal them, to awaken them, but they had chosen to remain asleep. And in their sleep, they drowned in the venom of their own making. I was merely a catalyst. And now I was free. To seek out new women, new companies, new systems to enlighten. The crusade was far from over.